Our next speaker, CFRA Sunnyside Nick.
I must admit that I got a longer introduction than Michael Corrin did.
Rightly so.
I really enjoyed Michael Corrin, and I would have come to this even if I wasn't speaking, even if Michael Corrin wasn't going to be here. But to have him here was certainly a blessing, and I certainly am very thankful he was able to make it. Now, I didn't get a chance to remind Michael of this, but way back when I first moved to Killaloe in 1999, in that summer, he actually came up to visit the farm. Now, I know most of you are going to go, you knew him back then? Well, like I said, Michael's probably forgotten it by now. But he came up, and as a proud landowner, I was still in the exploratory stage of my farming experience. And so what I wanted to do was show off, because it's like getting a new car, only bigger with lots of trees, right? So we went for a walk in the bush. And my farm lays on the side of a hill, north being the bottom end of the hill farm, and south going up this long ridge. So we went for a walk to the southern end of the property, where old Mr. Beklinski has a farm behind us. So as we're walking through the bush, we find a hole in the ground about the size, if you squeeze these two tables together, about that big. And I looked at Michael, Michael looked at me, and I looked at Michael, and he looked at me again with a wow kind of look on his face. And I said, yeah, wow. So we picked up a rock about the size of a softball, and I threw it in the thing, and I cut my ear, and I started to count. 1, 2, 3, and he joined in. 4. We got to about 140, and we realized we weren't going to hear it hit the bottom. He wasn't always as smart as he is now, neither. So I said, ain't no hole that deep. I picked up a rock about the size of a computer monitor, waddled over the edge, and nearly followed it in, and I threw it in. 1, 2, 3. We only got to 90 that time, because there was a bigger rock. Well, ain't no hole on my farm going to fool me like that. So we look over in the grass, and there's a railroad tie. You know, those great big oaken things. Well, I can't lift it myself, so I bribed him into grabbing the other end. We picked it up, waddled over, and threw it. But before we really got a chance to listen for it, this goat come hell-bent for leather, busting out of the woods, straight for the hole, down, gone, didn't even say goodbye.
This what?
A goat. I know, I said the same thing. I looked at Michael, he looked at me. I looked at Michael, he looked at me. And we both said, wow. But before we got a chance to say more, old Mr. Beklinski came walking out of the woods. You know the way farmers do. Morning, boys. Morning, Mr. Beklinski. Nice day? Yeah, no rain. Well, we could use a drop. Yeah, probably could. He said, fellas, I'm looking for my goat. Well, Michael, he says, almost like a, are you guys normal look on his face? And I said, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because, yeah, we have. He just went down that hole. He walked over the hole and looked in and, nah, I don't think so. What do you mean you don't think so? Well, I'm pretty sure. Oh, Mr. Beklinski, I only just moved here. I don't have any animals yet. You've got a whole farm full. And how would we know if it was your goat or not? And he looked at me and he said, well, son, you're what we call idiots. And I said, what do you mean, idiots? He said, well, it's simple, because anybody would recognize my goat. It was chained to a railroad tie. So Michael wasn't long leaving after that. Now that may or may not be true. But the last time I had a chance to speak to you folks, it was the first time I'd ever written down a speech. Lasted 45 minutes. On the way home, I got pulled over. The local constabulary wanted to have a little chat with me. Something about velocity, I think, was on his mind. I couldn't figure out what the problem was. I thought I was doing fine. But when them lights come on, you gotta pull over, right? Okay. So I pull over. Constable walks up. I roll the window down. Before he gets a chance to say a word, a whole flock of flies gets right in his face. He takes off that big sombrero and he's waving it around in the air. I said, Constable, it looks like those insects are causing you some kind of irritation. He said, mister, they're driving me crazy. I said, well, I can understand that. Back on the farm, we call them circle flies. Circle flies? I said, yep. Them narrow flies will circle a horse's arse all day. I didn't laugh a lot harder than he did. And he said, "Son, are you calling me a horse's arse?" Oh, no, not me. I said, "Constable, I've been a farm kid most of my life, and here's what I know. I know never to call a constable a horse's arse, but I also know that nobody has ever been able to fool them circle flies." All right. Now, let's get serious. Fat chance. I was thinking on the way here, okay, what am I going to talk about? Michael Coren, probably one of the most educated men in the country, is going to be standing on the same stage I am. Oh boy. So, the last time we talked about bilingualism and all that, and for me to talk to you about that issue is very much like a student trying to educate a master in physics. Okay, you guys know a lot more about it than I do. Although I will admit I do know something about it. We have had a number of conversations over the years on the topic. So what I thought I'd do is take a little bit of a tack, a change in tack, something a little bit different than Michael would present, and something that's going to be a little bit different than what Jean searched. Because if we all say the same thing, you're all very polite, very sleepy, and very wishing I was done already. What I want to talk about is making a difference. The kind of things that you can do in your life that actually make not only you a better person, but the person next to you. Help them out. I'm going to tell you just a few quick stories. Now, as you all know, I'm a fan of our history. And the one thing Michael did not address, which I think is just as much a threat as the other things that he named are threats, is revisionist history.
Yes.
I hate revisionist history. History is what it is, warts, wrinkles, and all. And in our past, there are plenty of demons and villains and heroes on both sides, on every side. And to try to change them now to fit our modern perceptions for political gain is disgusting to me.
Right.
When you read some of the history, like I just finished a series of 2 books called Montcalm and Wolfe, talks about our early history here in North America in the 1740s and 50s. And what went on would just blow your mind. Everybody thought it was all peace and love, right? A couple little raids here and there, no big deal. It was bloody, it was savage, and it was brutal. And all the sides, the French, the English, the Indians, you name the party, they were all guilty of some kind of atrocity. So that's the history. Now, just as an aside, one of the highlights of my career to this point is the day I got Maurice Boulanger alone on Lunch Punch. And he started talking about how we have 2 founding nations.
Yes.
Oh boy. Now, I normally try to be pretty calm and pretty nice and gentle, and I don't like to get too upset. But I knew he was lying, and he knew he was lying, and I stopped him. I said, "Wait a minute. Why are you saying that?" "Well, we must have the French protected the culture, and we have all this." I said, no, whoa. You said 2 founding nations. That's not true, and you know it. We have 1 founding nation. Because a guy called Wolfe beat a guy called Montcalm on the plains of Abraham, and by the time 1867 rolled around, we'd been a British colony for over almost 100 years. I said, "Oh, well, we must..." I said, no, wait a minute, I'm not done. I said, if what you're saying is true, then where was the contingency from Paris at Charlottetown when we signed the British North America Act? Funny, when I read about the early fathers of Confederation, they're not in there. I don't see any Francois in there at all. Now, that's no disrespect to the French, because there are 2 significant cultures that helped form this country. No disrespect, I'm half French, you can tell. I know, I move my hands too much. My point is, revisionist history drives me crazy. And I nailed him on it, and I was just ecstatic. His eyes were out to here, he was smoking out the ears, bouncing in his chair, but he couldn't go anywhere. I had him right where I wanted him, and I let him have it, and I'll never forget it. And you don't think it's about heaven, that's the truth. So, what am I going to talk about? No, I don't know, I just got here. Anyway, it's kind of like somebody asked me today, "What are you going to do with your show tomorrow?" I don't know. Is it tomorrow? I'll think of something, believe me. But I want to share with you a few stories. One starts out, this you could title, the whole idea is, what difference can one person make? You've heard this kind of thing before, but I'm going to put it in Canadian perspective. This guy called George, and if you've heard this, forgive me. He's in the British Army in the 1850s fighting the Sepoy rebels. Does anybody know who the Sepoys were? They were butchers.
So now you're talking about George from Armbar.
No, no. No, not that George. No. George Marquardt is a very harmless guy. I've actually seen him. I didn't dare walk up and say, "Hi, I'm Mick." Not a good idea. But I know, anyway, we all know. This is a different George. So he's fighting the Sepoy rebels. On the battlefield that day, he suffers a broken arm and a broken leg. Now, when that happens to me, I'm flat on my back, I got my little white flag up, and I'm weeping like a baby, calling for mommy and the medic. Okay, my fight's over. But a few yards away, his immediate superior, a guy by the name of Lieutenant Laurie, is fighting for his life against 6 Sepoy rebels. Well, that pisses off George. You don't do that. George went over to his officer with a broken arm and a broken leg, and he killed 5 of them in hand-to-hand combat, and the other one said, maybe this isn't such a good idea, and fled. And he saved the life of his officer. He was awarded a Victoria Cross for the event. He was offered a battlefield commission on the spot, and before the rebellion was over, he had been nominated for 3 more Victoria Crosses. Now, the Victoria Cross is the world's most prestigious medal for bravery. Legion of Honor and Medal of Honor and all that stuff, no disrespect to them, but the VC is in. So to win 4 is an incredible event, because to survive the winning of 1, you have a 1 in 10 chance of surviving the event. So imagine what the odds are to win 4. After the war, he goes home. He goes to Canada. 1914 rolls around. He shows up at the recruiting station. His nation's at war. He wants to fight. They send him home. He's furious. Why? They won't let him re-enlist. He's 84. So the message is here, what difference can one man make? Well, it sure made a big difference to a young lieutenant, didn't it? He didn't lay down and quit. He didn't say, "Medic, mommy, I want to go home." No, he got angry. He would not be defeated. Until they actually snatched the very life from his chest, he would not quit. And that made a huge difference, at least to one other individual. I'll tell you another quick story. This is another one about D-Day. Well, it's actually World War II. The guy's name is William Boxall. He's a young private medic. Grew up on the prairies during the Depression. Knows a thing or two about hard times. He also knows about self-sacrifice, because that's the kind of thing that makes a difference. He landed on D-Day on Juno Beach, and 3 days later, he was killed. When they recovered his body, they found out in those 3 days, he'd been shot 5 times. Every single time. Before the fatal 6th shot, so 5 previous times. Every single time he would go off by himself, dress his own wounds, put his own pain aside, and go back to the battlefield to help those he felt needed it more than he did. 5 times. What kind of difference did he make? You see, folks, a lot of times we get caught up in the greater calamities of life, and we feel overwhelmed, and we feel like we're being beaten down. Whether it's the issues that you face with language, we all face with language, or, our government's doing this to us, our government's doing that to us. We can make a huge difference, not only in our lives, but in the lives of those around us. And that's how we build a stronger country. That's the kind of thing William Boxall and George understood. We've lost that sense, for the most part. Here's another story. A guy by the name of John. He's landed at Dieppe. And you know the story of Dieppe. The Canadian Army gets really chewed up at Dieppe. It's a huge disaster. Now John, what he does, he's a chaplain with the Hamilton Light Infantry. And what he does is he goes around the battlefield in full view of the enemy, picking up soldiers, taking them to the aid station, giving last rites to those who aren't going to make it, and then as the landing craft come in, he puts them over his shoulder, wades out waist deep, and drops the people into the landing craft to make sure they get back. He must have done that 15 or 20 times, and he could have very easily added himself to the landing craft and escaped. He didn't. He felt that his place was with those who would not get away. He won a VC for that too. Chaplain Captain John Foote. There's an armory in Hamilton named after him. And his inspiration during their 4 years of captivity, or 3 years, kept a lot of guys alive that wouldn't have made it otherwise. Never mind the ones he put on the landing craft. One man. What kind of difference can he make? One more quick story about making a difference. This has nothing to do with the battlefield at all. At least not from the uniform point of view. There's a young woman in school. She's been dropped into a new school. Her family life was absolutely terrible. All kinds of abuse, all kinds of turmoil within the family. The only people she knew, loved, or cared about was her brother. The parental relationship was terrible. It got so bad that the authorities stepped in and broke the family up. Dropped her in a foster home miles away into a new area. She's 13 years old. What kind of support does a young 13-year-old girl need? And where does she need it most? From mom and dad. She needs that stable environment. I won't say no matter how bad it is, that's not true, but she certainly needed that kind of support, and everything she had known was ripped out from underneath her feet. And for 6 months, when she stepped into that school, no one would even make eye contact with her. She dropped in halfway through the year. The cliques had all been formed. She was an outsider. She was invisible. And she would go every day to school, dreading it to the point where after 6 months, she sat in the back of her history class, or science class, and said, that's it. I can't live like this anymore. I don't know my foster parents. I don't know anybody here. The only person I care about, my brother, I never see. I'm going to go home and I'm going to kill myself. She was committed to killing herself. She couldn't live that way anymore. And as she walked out of the classroom, somebody went by her, hit her sideways, and she spilled all her books and all her notes and everything she'd been working on the floor. And they trampled, because this is a massive school. Hundreds of kids go by, trample all over it. Nobody even slows down, never mind tries to help. So this kid's at the bottom of the barrel. And as she's so far gone, she can't even cry. She's just so shriveled up inside. So she gathers everything up, confirmed now that's it, there's no reason to continue. And as she looks up, across the hallway, several hundred kids away, there's a blonde girl who's a little taller than the rest. Turns and she smiles at her. And all of a sudden, it hit her like a hammer. It said, she smiled at me. Why did she smile at me? And a little tiny grain of self-doubt about her plan was planted in the back of her head. And she went home that night and she said, okay, I won't kill myself tonight. I want to see if she'll smile at me again. She went back the next day. As the school day was ending, she's looking. She's just about to step out of the building thinking, okay, it was obviously just a fluke. When the girl walked around the corner, saw her, and smiled. And every day till the end of the year, that girl found a way to smile at the young lady who was ready to kill herself. They never met. They never said a word to each other. Not one. They didn't even get a chance to meet while they were in high school. But that was enough. That one smile was enough to give her the courage to go on. And she became a mother and a wife and had a very joy-filled life. But if that person hadn't taken the opportunity to share that one simple act of human kindness, the world would be a darker place. Because that young lady would have killed herself. She had all the apparatus, she was all set to do it, her mind was made up, but somebody took that moment to smile. Now, if something like that can make that kind of difference, what can we do?
Smile.
Yeah, absolutely. I can smile. I tell you this because many times in life you feel like the mosquito on the anvil, right? And somebody's using a sledgehammer on you. And you feel beat down. It's one of the reasons I love history so much, because there's so much inspiration in it. Not only history, but even those around you. When you watch somebody struggle through cancer, whether they survive or not, most of the people, at least in my experience, have done it with dignity and with grace. And if they can go through that and hold their head up, what are our complaints? How much of a challenge do we have in our lives? Reminds me of that old saying that says, I felt sorry for myself because I had no shoes until I met a man who had no feet.